Welcome to the Brimful Podcast. I'm Pamela Tessman, an IBCLC, a mother of two, and former childbirth educator, doula, and ACE. I share evidence-based tips and stories on infant feeding and the perinatal period. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, so please always see your healthcare provider if you have concerns. Be sure to follow me at brim.familycare on social media or visit my website at brimfamilycare.com. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Trill, who is a molecular biologist, patented inventor, and biotech executive who founded Free to Feed. She specializes in supporting families with food reactivity in breastfed infants, helping parents understand what's typical and what requires attention, and how to approach it with confidence and care. She's here to share her expertise on how parents can navigate feeding challenges during the holidays, enjoy meals without anxiety, get enough calories themselves, and support their baby's digestion in practical, evidence-based ways. I am a huge fan. Welcome, Dr. Trill.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's just jump right in. Can you just tell us how you came to this role?
Absolutely. It was kind of a perfect storm. So I have a PhD in cellular molecular biology, and I focus my research and work all around proteins. And that has evolved over time. Proteins is a very broad category. And originally it was proteins as it relates to cancer therapeutics. And I was focused there when I had my first baby. My oldest, June, is now 10. And when she was born, she was inconsolable, cried all of the time. And through a series of what was kind of a longer story, but a really, really rough journey in our beginning of our breastfeeding journey, and then eventually into finding out that she had food reactivity and was reacting to something that was transferring from my diet to my breast. And even in that moment, when I first found out that that was likely the route that we were going down, I had no idea that that was even a possibility, that something that I ate could transfer to the breast and cause her an allergic reaction. And at that stage, when we finally uncovered that, she was full-blown bloody stools, eczema head to toe, and inconsolable and really, really struggling, and eventually admitted to the hospital. And the process to figure out that she had food reactivity was awful. They literally put her on a 24-hour starvation diet. That's all that they said that they could do. Because of the type of reaction she's having and because of how young she was, there wasn't a test for her. So it was literally just don't feed her at all and see if she gets a little bit better. And on the other side, I was told that my only option was a hypoallergenic formula. And unfortunately, at the same time, like I mentioned, I was in grad school. And so come to find out that our insurance wouldn't cover the formula, and the formula is so very expensive. And grad school doesn't pay very well. And so I started asking the questions in the hospital of like, okay, I do truly want to keep breastfeeding. I also feel like I can't afford to feed her the formula she needs. Is there any middle ground here? Is there any space in which I can continue breastfeeding my baby? If you can make a hypoallergenic formula that she can tolerate, can I make hypoallergenic breast milk that she could tolerate? All sensitive purposes. And the answer was a hesitant, we don't know. There was literally just a moment of, here's a laundry list. They literally gave me a crazy list of foods to try to take out of my diet, and then discharged us from the hospital with a bunch of misinformation around transfer and how long all of it would take. And with my oldest, I went on a really strict elimination diet for a whole year to breastfeed her successfully. And I say successfully for her because we were able to get to baseline, happy, healthy baby, which is amazing. But I suffered during that time, unfortunately, because of resources and lack of knowledge and lack of space to go, really. And a lot of the providers around me were just saying, well, if it's working, keep doing what you're doing. But in the interim, I was malnourished. I had nutrient deficiencies. I had mental health issues. And When my second daughter was born, a few years later, that's when I popped my head out of the sand and was like, okay, where's the research and the resources and the people? There has to be more now than there was 3 years ago. And what I found were lots of other families and very little of the rest of what I needed. And that only a few weeks postpartum with my littlest is when I founded Free to Feed. And Free to Feed came to light because of the new job that I was working when my youngest was born. I was in all of the irony in the world working for a dairy processing facility. And the irony being that if you have a baby with food allergies, almost exclusively the first thing they tell you to take out is cow's milk protein. And so I'm making millions of pounds of cottage cheese and sour cream and milk products as running their lab as their quality manager. And back to work, my second baby starts presenting with symptoms on another elimination diet. And I'm at work teaching the lab techs how to use a little lateral flow test, which is the snazzy word for like a pregnancy test, in the lab to make sure that we don't accidentally get other allergens in the milk. So for example, if we run a big vat of soy milk and then in that same vat we clean it and then we run cow's milk, there's a little test that the lab techs could use to prove to the FDA that we didn't accidentally get soy into the cow's milk or milk into the soy milk, or excuse me, cow's milk. And I had one of those really stereotypical moments of aha, right? That, oh wow, like if in 3 minutes I can tell if there's soy in cow's milk, what if I could just test my milk and know if there was egg in there or cow's milk or soy or others in just a few minutes? That would allow me to narrow down what my kiddo is allergic to very quickly and truly feel like would have changed my life. And so I took this test kit at work and I ran into the closet where my pump was and I squirted breast milk onto it and it didn't work. And so I called the company, of course, I called the company and this poor man, I was like, hey, it's Trill. I put my breast milk on your test kit and it didn't work and I want to talk about it. And this man was like, you put your what? That's not what and that was my first partnership 7 years ago. To start the process, I went home that night and was like, we have to do something. It's crazy that we do this for cows and not for women. It's crazy that there's so much information here. It's crazy to think that I'm going to do this for another year of my life plus. Let's do something better. And that's when I started Free to Feed.
Amazing. Wow. I love your passion and your energy for that because, yeah, that's such a needed resource. And I'm so glad you thought of that.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And so what was your children allergic to then? What did it end up being in the end?
Yes. So the interesting piece is with June, my oldest, who's now 10, I don't know because I was so afraid to bring foods back that I went on this really extensive elimination diet and didn't bring foods back until we were on the other side of our breastfeeding journey. And so by then she had outgrown her food triggers, thankfully, right? And so a vast majority of these kiddos, and we can get into the weeds on like categories of food allergies and whatnot, but essentially these kiddos who have things like bloody stool, eczema, vomiting, and similar, typically they outgrow by the time they're 5, and many of them outgrow by age 1. And so with June, she'd outgrown by age 1. We brought foods in for her, and we never, during the reintroduction process, saw a reaction. So we don't know out of that like litany of things that I took out of my diet, it may have just been one thing, but I had no idea. And
Right.
because of the misinformation around transfer, I was too afraid to try something in my own diet because I was told that it would be in my breast for so long after you consume it. Now we have research
Right.
that shows that's not the case. But it absolutely put the fear in me of like, well, if I do this, then I'm, quote unquote, as I was told, contaminated or my milk was like poison basically for 2 weeks at a time. So I didn't bring things back. With my second, though, my youngest kiddo, who's 7 now, Rose, her biggest trigger ended up being oats. So she had some other smaller triggers. Dairy and soy caused her some issues, but oats caused profuse vomiting. And what we later found out was called FPIES, food protein induced
Right.
intercolitis syndrome. And so she had FPIES oats as her main trigger, which you can imagine for many families listening to this, like oats, right, may sound really surprising. And it can be hard to get to that stage of finding out that oats was the problem when you're told to just remove cow's milk protein, for example.
Yeah, wow. I went through a similar journey with my first son, and say kind of similar to yours, where I took out everything. I saw all the wrong people for guidance and took out everything, felt so hungry all the time, felt really malnourished, and I eventually lost my milk supply because of that. So, knowing what I know now, I would have done things a lot differently. And I'm seeing a lot of families who are navigating these challenges and are unfortunately receiving a lot of conflicting advice, and it's really difficult to journey through.
Sorry you went through that too. It's really unfortunate to know that that parents and families are still experiencing this issue now, and that
Yeah.
it in many spaces it hasn't gotten better.
Yeah. And like you said, there's a lot of, well, there's hypoallergenic formula. Just do that. And unfortunately, that doesn't always work either. So,
No, no, the concept that that is quote unquote easier for many families, it's not. Either it's not affordable for them, it's not accessible for them, or for some families who have very high sensitive kiddos, they may still react to hypoallergenic formula because of the
right.
other ingredients in the formula that do still have trace proteins, like the soy oil, for example. Even if you're told, like, oh, soy oil, totally hypoallergenic, can't be reacted to, there's actually research that shows that it does have protein fragments and it can cause reactions. So for some of us, yes, absolutely hypoallergenic formula can be a tool for us. And for some of us, it can't. And that's super hard to navigate.
Yes. So let's back it up a little bit for listeners and talk about signs and symptoms of sensitivity in infants, because I think that gets really confused. Because often, what I often see is that parents assume they have a sensitive kiddo, and it actually ends up being something like reflux because of the way that they're latching. So, can you talk about some really common symptoms so that parents can identify it easily?
Absolutely. That is one of the top things that I work really hard and try to educate families around, because the last thing I want you to do is to take anything out of your diet ever if you don't have to. And if you do take something
Mm-hmm.
out of your diet, that you only take it out as long as you absolutely need to. So when we're thinking about symptoms, the interesting thing with each of these symptoms is that almost all of them have a mimicking factor. And so as we talk about these different symptoms, I think it's also helpful to say, like you mentioned, if there's a latch issue, we may confuse vomiting with, is this an issue with latch, for example. So when we're thinking about symptoms, first on the outside of the body, we can have things like hives, eczema, and rash responses. That's really common for food reactivity kiddos, and a environmental trigger can also cause it. So for some kiddos, and the actual data on this is about half. For those kiddos who have like eczema responses, about half of them have food triggers that will cause an additional flare for them, and others have environmental triggers. For my oldest, she started out having food triggers, and my elimination diet got her skin to completely clear. Later in life, we found that she also had some environmental triggers, and we did patch testing for her when she was about 8 years old to figure out what those were. And so that's the outside. And then as we go inside, top to bottom, we can experience chronic congestion, reflux vomiting, bringing food back up, right? And then as we move on down, we have issues with stooling, such as diarrhea, constipation, bloody stool, mucousy stool. And then there's secondary symptoms to all of those problems. So for example, if my kiddo has really bad eczema, they might have sleep disturbances because they're itchy and they're uncomfortable, right? Or if
Mm.
my kiddo is vomiting a lot, like my second, they may have weight gain problems. That's a secondary symptom to the vomiting, because she's not able to keep down enough of her nutrients in order to continue to grow on the growth curve like we expect. Another similar issue would be, quote unquote, I don't love the word colic, but quote unquote colic inconsolability, where we have a kiddo who has bloody stool and they're uncomfortable. That causes them discomfort. And so they are inconsolable. They cry a lot, right? So the secondary symptoms. The interesting thing to know about food reactivity is twofold. One, that almost all kiddos don't express every one of those symptoms, which is really important to mention. So if you're listening to this and you've been told like, well, your baby's gaining weight, so they can't have food reactivity. That's not the case. Or, well, your baby doesn't have a skin problem, so they can't have food reactivity. Or your baby doesn't have blood in stool, so they can't have food reactivity. Unfortunately, and quite frankly, I wish there was like a magic, like stamp of like, yep, this is for sure what you're dealing with or not. and I hope there is that in the future. Every kiddo will express differently, and typically they have one or two of those symptoms. Like my
Right.
oldest having eczema and bloody stool, my youngest having vomiting, for example. Now, as you mentioned, though, each of those things can have a mimicking factor. For example, for kiddos who have blood in stool, we always talk and try to educate around other things that can cause blood in stool, right? So if the blood is really dark and red, how do your nipples look, right? Do you have any kind of nipple damage that could lead to some blood that you're going to see on the back end of baby then? Or is there the potential for an anal fissure? What does the blood look like? Is it possible that there's a little cut at the anus that's causing a little bit of blood in the stool? How does the rest of the stool look? Does the rest of the stool look beautiful? You've got a little bit of specks of blood, more likely to be an anal fissure than not. And so there's nuances for each of these symptoms, right? Back to your reflex point that there's a difference between like spit up that like a lot of kiddos navigate and there isn't an issue per se. They're a little spitty and that can happen, absolutely. Babies being babies. And then there's issues where they're bringing it up more readily and it's causing some discomfort, or it's always around most feeds. And so then we start talking about, is there an issue with the latch? Is there an issue in positioning? Things like that. We're bringing in too much air. Then we're bringing up too much of our food, all the way to the other side of that spectrum, which is, do we have food reactivity? And there's like nuanced things to tease out in each individual journey to say like, oh, you're more or less likely to be navigating food reactivity. And the first thing is to rule out those. I don't love calling them the easier, but they are, in for all extensive purposes. It's a little bit easier to go get a latch assessment than to go through your pantry and try to remove a bunch of stuff from your diet. So
Yes.
navigating, ensure that you're ruling out those other issues, the lactation issues and similar, before we get into an elimination diet space.
Yes. Great. Yeah. And I think it's frustrating for parents to not be able to get those allergy tests on babies because it's often not accurate for them. So it's a process of elimination essentially of figuring out if it's the latch or not, and a lot of trial and error, and it can be so exhausting. So
Yeah, I would love to add just a little bit to that on the testing
yeah.
front. For any families or anything that the reason why there isn't effective testing for us is that there's two main categories of food reactivity. And the first is what we stereotypically think of a food allergy, right? We think of somebody having a peanut, going into anaphylactic shock, needing an EpiPen, and going to the hospital. That's called an
Right.
IgE-mediated food allergy. And the tests that we have available at the allergist specifically look for IgEs, that type of reaction that causes those more life-threatening reactions, those life-threatening responses. And so if your kiddo
Right.
has hives, swellings, things like that, you can go get an IgE-mediated test. However, they are less and less accurate the younger your kiddo is. And so oftentimes allergists will say like, hey, I prefer not to do this test until baby's at least 6 months old or older, for example, because they're less and less accurate. The immune system's constantly developing in those first few months. But the big catch here is that a vast majority of families who are navigating food reactivity don't have that category. They don't have the hives and swelling. They have non-IgE mediated food allergies, which is the eczema, the reflux, the vomiting, the bloody stool, the mucousy stool. Those kiddos have what's called a non-IgE mediated food allergy. And so you can test those IgE tests all day long and they're going to come back negative. And it can feel so dismissing to be like, I know for a fact that when I give my baby oats, she vomits profusely for hours on end, and then go get an allergy test and be like, she's not allergic to oats at all. It's because that's not the pathway in the body. And there is, unfortunately, yet no test for non IgE mediated food allergies. So if you have listeners in that space of like, I just feel like I'm crazy because we went and did these tests, but I know my baby has some reactivity issues. That's what's happening on the test front.
Yes, you're not crazy.
Not
Yeah,
crazy.
thank you for clarifying that. So, what would your advice be for someone who has assessed the latch, seen an IBCLC, and made sure that feeding is going smoothly and they're still having these reactions? What would the first step be for them?
Yeah, so the that's absolutely the first step, as you mentioned. So seeing an IBCLC, confirming that the mechanisms, right, of your breastfeeding
Mm-hmm.
journey are good and that you're supported there. Once you've ruled out those issues, the next step is to consider the food side of your journey. And when we're thinking about an elimination diet, right, and as you mentioned, because there is no test for these types of food reactivity issues, unfortunately, for now, the answer is trial and error. It's taking things out of the diet and bringing things back into the diet. And so when we think at Free to Feed about a food allergy journey and an elimination diet, usually we look at it in three categories. The first is one at a time, where we go based on symptom, what's the most likely thing to cause your kiddo an allergic reaction? So if you have a kiddo who has blood and stool and you consume a lot of dairy products, that's me. And that then is the most likely trigger for your particular types of symptoms. And for some kiddos, we can go one at a time because they're more mild symptoms and the breastfeeding journey isn't at risk here. And so we can do this kind of one at a time kind of journey. And anytime that we pick an elimination diet, we do it for 5 days. So we can get into why here in just a second. But the second strategy category is to do a grouping of foods at one time. And so not into the space of like lots of them, right? But maybe let's say 5 items of foods in one grouping. And that list of foods is what we do at Free to Feed, where we've collected hundreds and hundreds of families worth of data to say if you have these symptoms, these are the triggers most likely to cause your baby an allergic reaction. Because it's really important to know that if your baby has blood and stool, your most common triggers are going to be dairy, soy, wheat, and egg, for example. But if your baby has vomiting reactions significantly and more so than blood and stool, then your baby's most likely triggers are dairy, soy, rice, and oats, for example. And so it's really important, and we've leaned really hard towards the data and the peer reviewed literature to say, what is your elimination diet based on your specific symptoms? And that's the second category, and that's the most common category that we go with. Because more often than not, once families have reached us, they've already started eliminating things, they've already done the dairy thing, the soy thing, and now they're looking for additional support. The third, and what you and I have kind of alluded to now, is a total elimination diet, where you're eliminating all but a handful of foods. Total elimination diets are not for long term, and they are not often recommended by us unless there are very specific situations and circumstances in which they're needed, which they can be a tool. They can be used for a couple of days. But we work really hard on expanding the diet really quickly, working with registered dietitians to make sure that that person's nutritionally complete during that time. And so a total elimination diet is like, hey, these are the 7 foods I'm going to eat on repeat for a couple of days to see if I can get baby to a better place than where they are right now. An example of that would be like when I got admitted to the hospital because baby's skin was weeping and infected and all that was coming out of her little body was blood. That's an example of that. However, the follow-up to that is we don't stay there, right? We don't stay in that space. We stay on the diet quickly. And so the reason why when we're working with families, we do a 5-day window, it's because a 5-day window is enough time to know if you're going in the right direction. So when you have kiddos we're working with, when you consume a food, it's going to peak in concentration in your breast within a few hours and steadily plummet from there if you're removing your breast milk on a regular cadence, meaning every couple of hours. And so the research shows that it's going to be gone typically within an 8-hour window and almost always 24 hours for everybody. So we give 24 hours for like the outliers and all of that, just as a catch-all. So once you then clear your milk, give a day for that, baby will have one of 2 kinds of symptoms. And they'll either have an acute reaction, which is something that happens fast and heals fast, or they'll have a chronic reaction, which takes longer to happen and takes longer to heal. An acute reaction is vomiting, right? They vomit and then they're feeling a little bit better within a few hours. A chronic reaction is blood and stool. It takes longer to happen because it's got to get all the way to the GI tract, and then it takes longer to heal because blood and stool is literally a wound in the gastrointestinal system that now needs to close and heal, just like eczema.
Right.
Now a wound in the skin that needs to close and heal. And so then we give the acute reactions is going to be about a day, right, for the reaction to happen and for baby to feel better. But those chronic reactions take up to 2 days, right, for us to see the full peak of the reaction, especially if baby's not stooling very frequently and you're looking at blood and stool, but it's only every other day, for example. We have 2 days for that, and then we give 2 days for impact so that you have enough time to see, are you going the right way? And for some kiddos who have acute reactions like the vomiting, at the end of your 5 days, if you've effectively removed the right things at the same time, you may get to brand new baby. And that does happen. And that happens sometimes with stooling issues too, if it's mild. But if you have a kiddo like my oldest that have really bad eczema, really bad blood in stool, by the end of the 5 days, we saw impact that we were going the right direction, but she needs more time to heal. And so that's why we go 5 days. We reassess at 5 days because one, that's actually doable as opposed to like, dramatically change your diet and then go away for a month. That's actually doable. And we can pivot after 5 days to say, oh, we got worse, or oh, we got better, we're going the right way, or things didn't change at all. What do we do now? And so
Right.
that's kind of how we think about the next steps in that elimination diet process.
Amazing. So I think another confusing piece for parents is figuring out the stool, because a lot of parents will see some mucus in the stool but have no other reactions, and so then they're kind of worried that there's an allergy. So what's your advice on stooling?
First, I want to give some grace to parents because it would be weird if we did know what normal baby poop looked like, unless you
Yeah.
are around babies a lot because you have younger siblings or you care for kiddos. Like, you become a parent, nobody sat me down and is like, let's talk about poop, right? So
Yeah.
a little bit, like, it's okay if you're in that space. um, on the science side, it's incredible. Researchers back in 2018 took little baggies and attached them to little baby butts of breastfed healthy infants and collected over 1,000 stool samples from these kiddos. And just like, again, kudos to these scientists because I can't imagine being like a lab tech in that research space. So they did this research, and what they found was really, really helpful. And then what we did at Free to Feed is we took all of this information and we put it into kind of more digestible resource for families so they can go see that plus a bunch of galleries at freetofeed.com/diaper, totally free, and you can paw through hundreds of pictures of diapers of good, bad, and ugly. And so when we're looking at a diaper, a few things that are important to note that are kind of red flags. The first is, as it relates to consistency with mucus, not all mucus is bad mucus. And you kind of
Mhm.
alluded to that, which is so important because, yes, it's very common that families will, like, open up a diaper, they see mucusy stool, and they're like, oh my God, something is wrong. But that's not always the case. And so when I'm looking at a diaper, and I look at many diapers, what a strange place my career has taken me. When I'm looking at diapers, I'm looking at a few things. The first is if it's mucus specifically, I'm looking at is the mucus homogeneous or consistent throughout the diaper? Meaning, like, as you're looking at the diaper, there is some mucus, meaning it's kind of shiny, or parents do this thing where they like smush the diaper together and then open it and they see that it's, quote unquote stringy, but it's all the way through the diaper. The diaper itself kind of looks the same all the way throughout. More often than not, when that happens, that means that the mucus came from the upper GI, which is oftentimes teething, illness, postnasal drip, things like that, versus food reactivity specifically. And so then starting to ask the questions of like, is baby teething? Have you had an illness come through your family? Is there something else that could be happening in the upper GI that would cause mucus throughout the diaper? And then the next thing that I'm looking at is if it's not throughout the diaper, then the other way that it can look is a concentrated gob or glob is the scientific term we're going to use here. Mucus, like, it looks like somebody blew their nose in this diaper, right? It is a concentrated form of mucus that you could literally, if you were so inclined, go and like pick it up out of that diaper, for example. Not that you would want to do that, but you could. Uh, and so when we're thinking about mucus, I'm looking at the diaper trying to be like, okay, are there areas of the diaper that have concentrated forms of mucus? Because that's less likely to come from the upper GI, more likely to be from a reaction in the lower GI area. And then the next thing is looking at other pieces of the whole picture, right? Because there's a whole baby here going on. And so, are there any other symptoms? How's the consistency or color otherwise? Is there any blood at all? Is there anything that has changed as it relates to frequency? So it's important for families to know that, like, watery stool, totally normal and is not considered diarrhea for a breastfed baby. which, we're not, again, typically told, right? If it soaks into the diaper completely,
Mm-hmm.
totally normal and healthy. But we get into the space of diarrhea if for a breastfed baby, if they're going more than 8 times a day. And so having those questions of like, okay, well, you see some of this mucus in here. How many times a day is baby going? Is it more than 8 times a day? Is it less than once every other day or so? Are we swinging into diarrhea or constipation? So those are the main things as it relates to mucus specifically. And one thing that's super hard is to find and talk to families who are chasing that perfect diaper, right? Because they're in
Yeah.
a Facebook group maybe or a chat where they're putting into pictures of diapers, and there's just individuals there who aren't fully trained in being able to identify what's good, bad, and ugly. And so then these families end up being chasing this like peanut butter smelling, perfect paste, not peanut butter smelling, popcorn smelling, peanut butter, spreadable, consistency diaper when like that is just one of many types of normal diaper for a breastfed baby. And so
Right.
it's really important to know that if you're listening to this and you're like chasing that perfect, like the angels shine down upon this diaper and sing, maybe that you don't need to remove more things from your diet, but instead you need to talk to someone who has more experience around what a normal diaper should look like.
Yes. Knowing that this is your baby's normal, perhaps. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's the same thing with like green stool as well, right? Because that can be from illness, vaccinations. So, yeah, very confusing for parents, especially if they've never done it before and it's a brand new experience for them. Baby poop, who would have thought as a parent you'd
Uh,
be so
and
interested?
it is, yes. Who would have thought I would be like outside in the sunlight, right? Like inspecting my
Yeah,
baby's diaper, or that I would have a whole album of baby poop, right? Like
right.
my poor phone when it's like, oh, look at memories, and it's like, I don't know what to categorize this as, lady, but like here's this for you. On your note though about color, couple of things to note is that one, as far as food reactivity is concerned, we never go on color alone for food reactivity, and we also never go on smell alone. So oftentimes families will be like, yeah, sometimes when I have food reaction symptoms, I get like this off smell, like maybe a vinegary smell. But there are so many things that can impact color, it can impact smell, and can impact gas. So the illness, the teething, the vaccinations, the latch, just a gajillion different things that we never
Hmm.
go on like that one thing alone. Like a little bit extra gassy alone, no. We're looking at what does the rest of the diaper look like and what do the rest of the symptoms look like.
Yes, good point. Yeah, so let's get into how to navigate the holidays then, since we're coming up on the winter holidays. Parents, I find, are often very anxious about, oh my gosh, my mother in law is going to be like, what's the problem? Just, have this pudding. And also, how do I go to these family gatherings and sit down with my family and be able to have a meal with them? So let's jump
Yes.
into that. What's your advice on that?
So there's a spectrum of advice that I'll say here because everybody's family is very different and it's very hard to navigate this journey, especially on the holidays, because food is such a central point of everything that is family gatherings, right? And there's a lot of like even cultural components here of like certain individuals maybe even feeling disrespected if you don't eat their food and things like that. So there's a lot of nuance
Yes.
there. And so that
Mm-hmm.
spectrum that I'll say is that for me navigating this, I had that experience too where there were family members who didn't understand, couldn't understand, refused to understand, and everything in between. And I also had family members who did and would respect like my decisions and things like that. So I had a little bit of everything in my journey. And what I'd say is that first and foremost, it's really, really important for families to know that this is a season, meaning that like this isn't forever, and it's highly likely that your baby's going to outgrow this, and there will be a day where you're on the other side of your breastfeeding journey, the other side of your food reactivity journey, and you'll be able to eat freely. And that was something that was very helpful for to me in the moment to remember, like this too will pass. Like this holiday right now kind of sucks. And
Yeah.
holidays will suck less, hopefully, right? Like that was helpful for me. Um, Some of the things that were also helpful is one, if the family is willing and able to learn, actually sharing with them content and information before you start the holidays with them. And that might be, depending on who that person is, that might be, a website. Free to Feed has holiday specific blog pieces, right? All around communicating with your family and how to navigate that. Or if it's videos, right, of like, oh, well, my mother-in-law is going to love some TikToks, right, for example.
Right.
So sharing content ahead of time so that you can kind of like prime those individuals to like, oh, I didn't realize that like butter is dairy, right?
Right.
Some pre-education, assuming that they know absolutely nothing, right? Because most don't. Most people don't know. And so they may truly think that their, mashed potatoes are dairy-free because they didn't splash milk in there, not realizing that like, no, the cheese and the butter you put in there is the problem. And so
Right.
pre-education, the second piece is oftentimes either eating ahead of time or bringing my own food. And I would parse this out based on where I was going and who I was interacting with. Some individuals, it's easier just to eat ahead of time and be like, oh, actually, I'm really full. I'm good to go, but thank you so much. And I'm going to, munch on some carrots over here from the veggie tray. Or for some, if I felt comfortable, I would bring my own food and just heat it up when I got there, right? Like, actually, I brought my own plate. We're in the middle of this food reactivity journey, and this is just easier for me. No disrespect, and I can't wait to eat all of your dishes next year, for example. And then all the
Yes.
way to like, there are some family dynamics where that's not really a safe space, where like that's not going to be taken well. And in those cases, and even for me in some instances, I chose not to engage with those groups of family members during this time. And so for me, it was like, hey, I love you so much. And this isn't like an activity, a gathering, or like a trip we're going to make this year. I've got a brand new little baby, and we're in this crazy food reactivity journey, and I'm on an elimination diet. It's a lot. So we're going to stay home this year. And for some, that can be that can bring the anxiety down, and it also like gives you a little bit of more sense of control, makes your holidays a little less crazy. And I think that like the answer to that just ends up being a combination of your comfortability and the people that you're navigating this with, because some are going to be super happy and helpful and things, and others will not. Throughout all of that, the biggest thing that I'll say is that if there is a slip, if you have your mother-in-law's mashed potatoes that she swears has nothing in it, and then you find out that it does, you are not bad. You are still
Yeah.
an amazing parent. You're doing an amazing job. That happens. In fact, like I would say the holidays is like when we get the most slips, right? The messages from people that are like, oh my God, I can't believe. And it's frustrating on many because it's like, I trusted this person. I have worked so hard. And if I was going to eat dairy, I would have went and like jumped in a vat of cheese, right? Like I wouldn't have eaten that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would have eaten. Um, and a lot of the like struggle around individuals who don't understand that like, yeah, my baby's not going to have an anaphylactic shock reaction right now, but I'm going to take them home and they're going to have bloody stool tomorrow morning. It's hard for them to conceptualize that. I do remember going to holidays and actually showing people the bloody diaper picture
Oh, good idea.
because
Yeah.
as like for those who just cannot conceptualize what do you mean,
Yeah.
like I would literally show them like here's a picture of her skin when I'm not on elimination diet. Here's a picture of her diaper that's just full of blood when I'm not on elimination diet. And
And
that was
here's a
helpful.
video of her crying.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
precisely. This is what we're avoiding by me having carrot sticks right now, right? And
Right.
so bringing a little bit of like almost forced empathy into the conversation
Yeah.
can be helpful too. Um, and all to say again, really important to know anytime we're talking about slips or accidents that it does not stay in your milk for weeks on end, which is where the holidays
Yes.
can be stressful too. It's so important to note that a slip does not mean that you start over. A slip does not mean that it's in your milk for weeks and weeks and weeks. One thing that's really important to note is that not everything that goes in our mouth ends up in our breast. And so it's very possible for you to have a slip and it never to reach your baby. It's also possible that you'll have a slip and you won't know. You will breastfeed your baby, you'll see the reaction, and by the time you see a reaction, your milk is already clear from
Right.
those proteins. And so there's no need to like stop breastfeeding. Keep breastfeeding through, because by the time you see the symptoms, that food is clear from your milk. And or if you know in the moment, so you're literally at the table and you're eating your mashed potatoes, know then that you have a choice at that point to say, okay, I'm going to pump and save this milk because baby's gonna likely outgrow this. I can use this milk later, and use previously pumped milk if I want to for a few feeds worth, and then get back to breastfeeding afterwards. Or I can feed through this and use it as a trial. Be like, okay, we're gonna do a cow's milk protein reintroduction trial, because we've got to do that at some point anyway. This is gonna be our trial. We're gonna go home and we're gonna, prepare for the potential for a reaction to happen. And none of those decisions are better or worse than the others.
Right. Yeah, that's really great advice. I think it's really important that you brought up the fact that it doesn't stay in your breast for weeks. Like you said earlier, it's mostly about healing the gut after an exposure.
And and that's where I think some of the confusion comes from, is that there's a difference. There's two different things happening in two different bodies, and there's a difference between like you consuming something and the quick peak and quick clearance, which makes total sense because we know that to be true for all other molecules in the body too, flavonoids, alcohol, all that fun stuff. Um, so for that to be true, and for your kiddos' reactions to be timing wise directly related to like what kind of reaction is it? Is it acute, going to happen fast, or is it chronic, going to take a little bit longer for it to happen? And then the timeline to healing is directly related to how severe the reaction was in the first place. So for example, if I have those mashed potatoes and it does transfer and I breastfeed my baby, maybe I get some blood and stool, but maybe it's not very much because I only had a few bites of my mashed potatoes, and then I realized because they taste too good, that'll be your that's always the warning where you're like, oh, this tastes really good. This probably is not free.
Yeah.
Probably is. And so, if that's the case, you may see some blood and stool, and it may be more mild. And in those cases, we may see that get back to baseline within just a couple of days. Or if your baby is very sensitive, you may see a reaction that's pretty significant, right? A decent amount of blood in stool, and it may take up to 2 weeks for you to see the full clearance of that blood. But if you've effectively removed whatever the trigger was, you should see that steady improvement. And that improvement is simply the healing from the reaction, not that your milk still has that trigger in it. I like to use the analogy of like a cut on our hand. When we think about chronic reactions needing to heal, if I get a little bitty cut on my hand and maybe it bleeds just a little bit, the next day it's probably okay. Maybe it's a little tender. If I rub against it, maybe it bleeds just a little bit more. But in general, like a couple of days, it's feeling better. Whereas if I have a decent amount of blood from this cut on my hand, it may take several weeks, especially because it's hard to put a Band-Aid on. It's being rubbed against constantly, which is what's happening in the GI tract. And so it may take a few weeks before it totally closes and I no longer see any blood or mucus or issues from that cut specifically. And so thinking about that on like the external side can be a little bit helpful when we're thinking about like, okay, how long am I looking at for this to heal completely? And biggest piece, like you mentioned, is that just because that timeline to heal may be days to weeks, that doesn't mean it's still in your milk. And so if you have a slip, know that your milk is likely clear before you even see the blood.
I love that analogy. Yeah, it's a wound, as you said. Yeah.
Yep.
So when we think about, as you said, babies often grow out of these sensitivities and allergies. What is your advice on reintroducing? When, how, what to look out for?
Yeah. When we think about reintroduction, I put them into two categories. The first is a confirmation trial, and the second is a trigger trial. And so a confirmation trial is I've removed 5 things from my diet. I have no idea what it was. Right. And so like you and I have experienced this where we remove many things and we get to baseline and then we look back and we're like, is it everything? Is it nothing?
Yeah.
Like one of the things? Is it 2 of them? Am I on this like really extensive elimination diet? Do I have to be? And so a confirmation trial happens as soon as we hit baseline. So as soon as baby is at baseline and the parent feels comfortable moving into a reintroduction, because I also want to give space for families who are like, can I just hang out here for a second? Because it's kind of nice, right? Like I hear oftentimes, and I've experienced this too, where especially if your baby was very inconsolable, families being like, oh, I feel like I just met my baby, right? Like it's been 4 months and I feel like just meeting my baby's like personality and like it's crazy. It's so amazing.
Yeah.
And so there's also some space there of like we can pause there for a minute if need be, right? If that's helpful. Or
Yeah.
if you're like going on the holidays, that's a good time to pause, right? Maybe we're not doing reintroduction
Yes.
strategy while traveling and things like that, or we're
Yeah.
sick. So there's moments in which we're going to pause, but generally once we reach baseline, baby's happy and healthy, symptoms are gone or close to gone. Um, and by what I mean by close to gone is if you brought something back that caused your baby to have a reaction, would you be able to tell? So, for example, with my baby's skin reactivity, it was so severe and took so long for it to heal that it may be more valuable for me to start trialing foods back before she gets to completely baseline, beautiful, perfect skin, because I need to bring foods back into my diet and I'll be able to know, I'll be able to tell if we flared back up versus not. And so once we're in that space of like, yep, I feel pretty confident that if I had dairy right now and it caused a reaction, I would be able to tell, we start a reintroduction strategy. And so usually we look at those 5 foods, for example, maybe more, maybe less. We look at those 5 foods and we say, okay, which ones are the least likely to cause us issues? We're going to go from least likely to most likely triggers. And we're also going to prioritize those foods that are most valuable to you. So let's say I remove these 5 foods and one of them is rice, and rice is like a staple in my diet. It's less likely that rice is the issue. I really would love to have it back in my diet. I need carbs in my life right now. And so, rice, right? We say we're going to do rice. And then we build out based on the symptoms and the person, how much, how long, what's a pass and what's a fail, and then what do you do if it's a pass or a fail. So that's a confirmation trial. And we do that for all the foods you've eliminated. And if there are foods that we feel pretty confident you do have an issue with, we may still do a reintroduction, but we'll do what's called a ladder, where we're doing a more broken down form of that protein to see like, can you have any of it? Meaning, if you remove soy from your diet, you feel really confident that, like, yeah, I had a slip where I had some edamame, I didn't realize, and we had a big bloody diaper. So we feel pretty confident that soy is an issue. But can we have soy oil and soy lecithin? Can we like just exist in a restaurant ever, basically? And so we may still be like, let's do in our confirmation trial a soy oil, soy lecithin trial to see do I have to remove all of this or just the more whole versions of the protein. So that's a confirmation trial. The other trial is a trigger trial. So once I've done that, I've been like, okay, yep, unfortunately, rice was a trigger. That really hurts my feelings. And soy was a trigger. All types of soy cause my baby reactivity. But the other 3 foods are not. And now my diet's more open and I am removing rice and soy specifically. Now, the recommendation in the literature for most symptoms, and I'll put like a little asterisk there, for most symptoms is to completely remove those things that cause reactions for about 6 months. And after a 6 month window, to then do a trigger trial where you're reintroducing that food to baby to see if they've outgrown it. Now, it's important to note that like nothing magical happens right at the 6 month mark, right? Like a fairy doesn't come down and pop them on the head, unfortunately, and be like, you're done. More often than not, the outgrowing of a non-IG mediated food allergy is like a little bit of a process, right? Where maybe after the 6 month mark, I reintroduce rice and I still see a reaction, but it's not as severe, maybe, right? Or we have completely outgrown and yay, rice is back in my diet. And so that's a trigger trial, typically 6 months after we've confirmed that like rice and soy is for sure an issue, and we will bring those foods back. And then it kind of like rinses and repeats where we say, okay, we did rice and yep, still a trigger. We're going to reset that clock. We're going to do it in 6 more months again. With the couple of pieces that I would recommend. One, for me, I literally would put a calendar invite in my calendar for 6 months after the trial, where I'd be like, so it would just pop up in my calendar and I wouldn't have to remember. It'd be like, time for rice. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's already been 6 months. Because otherwise I'm in my
Right.
phone scrolling. When was the last time I was talking about
Right.
fertility?
Yeah.
So that can be helpful. And then the other thing to note is that 6 months is a window. And so the reason why 6 months is because that gives time for full healing, complete healing of the skin or gastrointestinal system, whatever it is. And it gives time for the immune system to continue developing without seeing the thing that elicits that allergic reaction. So the research shows then that it increases the likelihood that you're going to outgrow in that timeline because the immune system isn't constantly reacting to that specific trigger. It's not seeing that trigger, misidentifying it as a threat, and then reacting accordingly. And so that gives it more time then to develop without being triggered, which can be helpful. Now, what's important to note is that like life happens, right? And so for me, for example, like my kiddo's bebopping around, she snags an oatmeal cookie from her sister, right? Eats a crumb off the floor. Guess what? We're doing a trigger trial today. And it's only been that's okay, right? It's okay. Life happens. It is still possible, absolutely possible for your baby to outgrow in 4 months, in 3 months, in 2 months. The 6 month is just a window and recommendation based on like the most number of people and what happens the majority of the time. And for some, you may even want to wait. For some, if there's no specific reason to need to bring that food in, like oats, for example, some families may wait a little bit longer because the reaction was traumatizing, right? And they may be like, actually, I'm not quite ready for profuse vomiting. I'm going to plan that very specifically, and it's not going to be today. And that's okay too.
Great. I was going to ask about the 6 month trial, so that's great to know. What about when families want to introduce a high allergen to avoid the allergy?
Yeah. So what's really fascinating is there is research and more research actually that's mounting and coming that's recently been published around specific foods that have impact on our likelihood to have a future IgE-mediated allergy if we get them in early and often. And so those specific foods currently that we have like really good data on that is peanuts and eggs. A lot of the other research that we have on the other allergens don't show that association. And so the American Association of Pediatrics has gone through all of that data and said peanuts and eggs certainly have an association, a moderate association is what they put it at, and that the other foods to date have not shown that same association if it's not a research study that's published by that food industry specifically. So the American Association of Pediatrics went through and said like, okay, we're very focused on research that's not published by, the peanut industry. Is there
Right.
association? Yes, there
Yeah.
is.
No
So that's
bias.
important.
Yeah.
No bias here. And so they said, taking out any bias, peanuts and eggs is where it's at for early and often introduction to date that we know of. And so in that case, then the next big question is like, what does early and what does often mean? And so the other thing that's really fascinating is that we're getting more research showing that we can even impact the likelihood of that future IgE-mediated allergy by having peanuts and eggs in our diet through the breast, which is amazing. And actually totally makes sense, right? It's a biological, normal thing for you to transfer your foods and for it to impact baby. So in that case, then the kind of decision tree, if you will, is if baby is already reactive to peanuts and eggs, then we do not want to be giving them the form of peanuts or eggs that causes them an allergic reaction, whether it's IgE mediated or non-IgE mediated. There isn't research that shows that, like, yes, we want to have bloody stools in hope of not having future IgE-mediated food allergies, that the immune system is reacting and that we want that to stop happening, right? And so then in those cases, that's where we prioritize. Let's say we have a family who has a kiddo that does have egg allergies, non-IgE mediated. Then in their confirmation trial, we're going to try to see, is there any version of egg that we can get in that would be valuable? So for example, can we get in a baked egg that doesn't cause blood and stool, but would still have an impact on reducing the likelihood of a future IgE-mediated food allergy? So there's like nuance there. Now, for those families who don't have IgE-mediated, non-IgE-mediated food allergies to peanuts or eggs, fabulous, wonderful. Then the recommendation is to get them in early and often. There's an interesting push-pull here that I want to acknowledge, that for the quote-unquote early, some of the research that's a little bit older said in between 4 to 6 months. And now we have research that says don't actually introduce foods to your kiddos before they're 6 months old. And so putting that research together then, better not to introduce foods because it's better for the microbiome, not to have foods before 6 months old, and developmentally appropriate and all that fun stuff. And that early introduction of peanuts is impactful if they get it before age 1 specifically. Putting that information together, then the recommendation is to make sure that you can introduce peanuts and eggs to your kiddo, hopefully around the time that they're like 6, 7, 8 months old, around that general time frame. Early means around 6 months old. Often means at least 2 grams of protein every week. And so that's actually a very small amount when you look at the protein that's in an egg or in a baked muffin or similar. And so some people just simply offer an egg or peanuts or peanut butter powder a few times a week to get that impact. And others will use like an allergen introduction kit, right, that has the powder available to you and add that to their foods, for example. So the early is 6 months once baby is at eating foods, and then the often is 2 grams of protein per week minimum. More is great, but that's what the research showed, is at least 2 grams of protein is what we want of each of them individually. The other interesting piece then to consider is that if there is a reaction, then the recommendation isn't just to push through, right? So the recommendation isn't like, well, if you already have a peanut allergy, just keep going. Instead, in that case, if you have like the IgE-mediated symptoms, the hives, the swelling, you can go to an allergist, get a test, and then there's actual tolerance programs that you can get into that allows you to basically, it's like microdosing your kiddo with a very, very specific amount of like dust of peanut, like just this little dusting of peanut, that we very, very slowly increase the microdose of a peanut until we get to a point where like kiddo could have a peanut without having a life-threatening reaction. The goal isn't necessarily always that like the kiddo could go eat, a bag of peanuts, but that they could accidentally be exposed to peanuts and not have to use an EpiPen, for example. And so if you do see a reaction to peanuts, eggs, or anything else in the IgE realm, it is not the same as like, quote unquote, just give them a little, right? It's a very specific scientific method to help bring up the tolerance of that kiddo who's reacted to peanuts, for example.
Okay, great. This is such a helpful piece of information for parents who are navigating all of this. I know for myself it was quite scary. And so hopefully listeners today are receiving a lot of reassurance and encouragement and confidence in what they're hearing today. How can they reach out and work with you?
I hope that as well. I want to reiterate what you said, that like this, I have done a lot in my life. I've been in the military, I've deployed, I've done a lot, and navigating food reactivity was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, by far. By far.
That says a lot.
There's no other journey. Yes, there's no other journey in your life where like something that you consume essentially like hurts your child. And that is like, that impacts so much of your life, right? And your mental health. So my bra's off to anyone who's navigating that right now and want to do a head nod to that. And as far as working with us, so we work with families anywhere under 5 years old, typically, those that are navigating more so non-IgE mediated food allergy symptoms. And you can get all of our free resources as well as our services, our consultations, and our education at freetofeed.com. We also offer professional courses for those who are IBCLCs or registered dietitians who work with families in order to help identify who are the families who are likely navigating this and like what are their best next steps that's science driven and kind of demystifies a lot of the misinformation in this space. So we have a lot of offerings and that can all be found on the website.
Amazing. And I discovered you on social media and I've been following you for years and love your content. So I encourage folks to go and follow you there. Can you remind me what your Instagram handle is?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is a labor of love for sure. I'm on Instagram at free.to.feed, and that's all me. So if you send me a DM or a message, that's me. I'm more than happy to help. I often look at diaper pictures on Instagram, just make sure that they're PG rated, and we're also over on all the other social media platforms, TikTok, Facebook, and otherwise, but I would definitely say that Instagram is where we're most active.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Trill. I know you're a very busy woman, so thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you all for tuning in today. All of the links to connect with Dr. Trill are in the show notes. And if you appreciate the podcast and the work we're doing here at Brimful, feel free to buy me a coffee. See you next time.